Hello, friends. Some days ago was the 8th anniversary of Swami Kriyananda's passing. We celebrated his moksha, or his freedom from this body and this world, and the illusion, the delusion that these bring. And that evening we had a celebration, we had a memorial service ceremony for him, and I spoke a little bit then. I also released a video that same day that was titled Swami Kriyananda's Legacy. And I wanted to today go a little farther with those thoughts, because I realized I touched on some of the outward aspects of Swami's life and his legacy, but I didn't sort of get to the core of it. And in meditating on it in the following days, some thoughts occurred to me. And I'll try to do this in the same spirit that he would have written about such things, because he wrote in a very condensed way. He edited very methodically his own words, and very conscientiously, in such a way that he did the reader's work for him. But he got a lot of meaning into a small space, because he was not given to long-winded, endless explanations of things. He tried to simplify, he tried to clarify, he tried to present things in such a way that people could go, oh, well, that makes sense, that resonates with me, or now I understand. And so the two thoughts that came to me, almost in the form of a kind of mantra. There's the classic little description of the seeker, the student, coming to the Zen master, and it's describing his life before enlightenment, and his life is essentially chop wood, carry water. And after enlightenment, what is his life like? Chop wood, carry water. And it's a little bit humorous, but also a kernel of truth in it as well, because outwardly our lives may not change that much, but inwardly the change is dramatic. Outwardly we may still be chopping wood and carrying water, but inwardly it's with freedom and with the awareness of God's presence. Well, in Swamiji's life, the two things that I would describe as kind of the key elements of his life and the key elements of his legacy were these: find truth and share joy. Find truth or know truth, which is to say find God, know God, because God is in fact truth. But also to share that joy, the joy of that understanding, the joy of that realization, the joy of God's presence, to always share that with others. Because we can never claim it as our own personally anyway. And he himself made a point of never doing that. And I'd like to just share a couple of little passages from Swamiji's book, The Path, which has now been rewritten as the New Path. But in the years that I knew it, when I read it initially, it moved me very greatly. In fact, I credit it with getting me personally on the path. But in the beginning of that book, just in the second chapter, he starts with saying, "Joy has always been my first love. I have longed to share it with others." And I can say from my own experience that that's what he really tried to do. He really tried to share joy with people. He shared it through music, he shared it through writing, he shared it through communities, he shared it in many, many different ways. But he really tried to give people that experience, or to encourage them to find that experience themselves within. But the passage that really sort of strikes to the core of this is at the very end of this book. He's concluding the writing of this book on literally his 50th birthday. So he's just turned 50 years old. The community has had celebrations of his 50th birthday all day long. It's been a big deal, And you have to realize in the experience of those in the community in those days, 50 years old was impossibly old. Now it's sort of no big deal, but at the time for a bunch of 20-somethings and 30-somethings, 50 was way out there. But anyway, after he's back home from all those events, he writes, "It is evening now. I sit peacefully in my home. My gaze takes in an expansive view through the large living room window. Hills, sky, and slowly wakening stars. Such, I reflect, is the path. Wherever man stands upon it, his soul evolution stretches out before him to infinity. The stages on the spiritual journey are only temporary. Temporary too are its tests, as also its fulfillments. God alone is real. Lord, I pray silently, may I never become attached to thy dream of creation, nor yet to the path that leads out of the dream, but only to thee, to thy love, to thy eternal joy." So he has spent 620 pages telling the story of his life, which is really, in a sense, telling the story of his life with Master, with Yogananda. But he spends, many, many pages describing his childhood and youth in faraway places throughout Europe, in America, traveling to Mexico, his adventures to get on the path. But then the real essence of the book kind of begins when he's with Yogananda. But after all of this, he comes to the end and says, the path itself is only the means to an end. It's only the means to knowing God. And we mustn't become attached to even the path itself. Which is to say, every human happiness, every limited kind of joy, ultimately we have to leave it behind. And that's what he did. He moved away from paradise in the form of Crystal Hermitage at Ananda Village, the most beautiful place in the world. In his own garden, he felt was the most beautiful place in the world. That same view that he's describing was also the view from that garden. And yet he moved away without a thought, without a care, moved to Europe to spend some years there, maybe 5 years there, and then moved to India to spend the final 9-10 years of his life. And he would come back for visits to those other places, Italy and a Crystal Hermitage at Ananda Village. But otherwise his life was for God, and nothing could hold him to the thought that he was the body or the personality or that he belonged to any particular place. His life was dedicated to those two things: find truth and share joy. And his desire to find truth he described as desperate. He was desperate to know the truth. He was desperate to understand. And he tried to give us a bit of that. And those, not everyone is on that wavelength. Not everyone is at that place. But those who are, understand. We can play around in this world for as long as we want. For eternity. It's a horrifying thought. We can go on for thousands and millions of incarnations. We can just keep going and going and going. This world is a stage. We can go off the stage, come back on the stage, we can play all the parts. We can play the hero, we can play the heroine, we can play the villain, we can play the plumber, we can play anybody we want. We can play all those roles and never know the truth of our own being. So his life was dedicated to that truth, and that's the legacy that he gave each one of us. Find the truth and share the joy with anyone and everyone we meet.